Hiya, so going to have a trawl through AC/DC's catalogue. Probably the first hard rock band, or what we'd call metal back then, that I got into. They're still an access band for people getting into rock. They've sold 200 million albums worldwide, 75 million in the States. Just a phenomenon, really. Obviously, recently they've returned to the scene and going to be doing a new album. So, just a band that just never dies, incredible success story. And we'll look at why that is. But they formed 73. The first album, High Voltage, is recorded 74. Prior to this, they have a singer called Dave Evans. They have a glam rock image that's dispensed with. Dave Evans is given the boot. Bon Scott joins. He writes lyrics and vocal lines for the instrumental tracks. The first album, High Voltage, like I said, it's released February 75. Couple of tracks, She's Got Balls and Little Lover. Now, they make the High Voltage European American release later on. So what happens with AC/DC, they released 2 albums prior to getting an international release. So obviously the first version of High Voltage, the other tracks kind of end up on Rarities things, and I think it was 74 Jailbreak. I actually think Malcolm does a solo even on one track on the original High Voltage. I don't have a copy of this. That's followed up with TNT, which is almost nearly the first proper album for us, because it's a long way to Top of Rock and Roll. Rock and Roll Singer, The Jack, The Live Wire, TNT, Can I Sit Next to You Girl, High Voltage. 7 of the tracks on that are on the European international release of High Voltage. They've got a cover of School Days and then Rocker, but Rocker ends up on Dirty Deeds. So the first AC/DC album we kind of get properly is this, the compendium of the first 2 Australian releases, this version of High Voltage. It's back to front as usual. Guys, I've tried flipping my phone. I can't see myself, and I'll get this in the wrong place. It has to be back to front. Always loved this as a kid when we had the album, because you've got these top fake school letters. And this is where the legend starts, that Angus was a schoolboy when he started in AC/DC. He wasn't. He was 18. But because he's little, he dressed up in the school uniform. They often lied about his age. He had his age down as being born 1959. So when this album came out, the inference was that his Angus is 15 or 16, but he wasn't. He was already, knocking 20. Some different covers for this. So you've got the original Australian cover. We had a cassette when we were kids, me and my brothers, and that had a weird kind of cartoon cover. But this is the official one. So like back in the day, all these albums I'm going to go through, we all had them on cassette, apart from one of them, which I'll come to, because that's what we bought our stuff on back then. Later on, they'd be on vinyl. These are nice digipacks from 2003 reissue. Really good. Okay, so what's on this album? So it's produced by Vanda and Young. So Vanda and Young, George Young is Angus and Malcolm's older brother. So he was in the Easy Beats, the first Australian band to have an international hit with Friday on My Mind. So they went over to London. So he had experience in the biz. Harry Vanda, he'd been in the Easy Beats as well, I think. He was of Dutch origin, but he'd emigrated, like the Young brothers, to Australia, to Sydney in the early 60s, I think. So I think it's a great record. It's virtually the TNT album, but with the 2 best tracks off the original High Voltage. So It's a Long Way to Top of Rock and Roll. What a great track, classic. Rock and Roll Singer, another stormer. The Jack, a track I've never been that fussed with. They always play it live. Doesn't do a lot for me. Live Wire, great track. TNT, yeah, they still play it live. Great. Can I Sit Next to You Girl? Yeah, quite interesting. You can hear the sort of glam rock influence on this. It's got a kind of little diddly diddly diddly, just a little kind of major kind of melody, slightly Highland Gaelic thing. Angus used to do a little solo spot called Fling Thing, I quite like it, but it's not a typical DC track. Little Lover, it's okay. She's Got Balls, yeah, it's alright. And then it finishes with High Voltage, which is a great track. But it's a solid 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. It's a really good sort of debut introduction. Now, I can't remember if Phil Rudd plays on this. I suspect he doesn't. I would have to check online to have a look here. Yeah, there's a guy right, is this the TNT I'm on here? Sorry about this, I'm just going to go High Voltage International. Yeah, so Phil Rudd plays on tracks 1 to 6 to 9. Yeah, so he plays on most of the tracks. So they've already establishing 4/5 of the classic lineup, which is Phil Rudd on drums, Angus and Malcolm on guitar, and Bon Scott on vocals. Now the bass on this is done by Mark Evans, so he plays on this. Yeah, he's bass guitar on 1 to 6 and 9. Yes, it's the same as Phil Rudd, so I'm assuming they play on the TNT album, which is put in the High Voltage, and they play on Dirty Deeds, and the next album, Let It Be Rock, then Mark Evans will be given the boot. I mean, we'll talk about the Cliff Williams when he comes into it. So it's a really good first introduction to DC. So the next album, the follow-up, is this Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Funny one, this. I had this album as a kid. We had it, the cassette. It's got classic tracks on it. It's my least favourite album of the Bon era. Some people love it. I do like it. But I'm not into it as much. Again, the Van Den Young production's good. They capture what AC/DC sound like. George used to sit with them at the piano and had worked through the songs. And then Bon accompanied lyrics, and he helped them kind of craft their style, their simplistic style into, dynamic songs. Obviously Dirty Deeds is the first track, classic, absolute classic. Then you got Love at First Feel, which I'm not that fussed with. Big Balls. It's quite funny, but it's kind of that comedy thing the band was doing occasionally back then, and it doesn't work as much. And I liked it when I was a kid because it was kind of funny, because Bon Scott does a kind of funny upper class accent. Rocker, it's a great track. Problem Child, so Problem Child appears on the next album as well. Great track. So I think that was side 1. Side 2 is going to be some rocking, which is alright. Ain't No Fun Waiting Around to Be a Millionaire. Yeah, they're okay tracks. I'm not as big on those. Then you've got one of the all-time deep cut tracks, which is beloved by fans, which is Ride On. An unusual track, an almost kind of country vibe, almost a ballad. The band doesn't really do ballads, but a softer track. Great lyrics by Bon, and captures Bon Scott's, wandering vagabond nature, I think. And then it finishes with Squealer, again, Bon Scott, a bit of a rogue, pretty controversial lyrics, but a track I always loved. So the great tracks on this, the 5 tracks that I think are really corking. I just think it's let down by the other ones. It's kind of a 6 out of 10 for me. Interestingly enough, this album wasn't released in the States till 1981, and it sold 6 million copies. So the band had already had success, and it's one of their best-selling albums there. But, a lot of people really love that album. The next one is Let There Be Rock. So this is important because it introduces the classic AC/DC logo, which is back at front. Got the picture of Angus on the back as well. So what happens now is they've got the classic logo, but they'll push Angus as the icon of the band, and this will make up their branding. This is an album, again, we had it on tape back in the day. When I was younger, I probably listened to High Voltage Dirty Deeds more, but this is the first classic album, I think. I'll explain what lets it down a little bit in a sec, but it's just not got a bad track on it. It has 5 Stone Cold Live classics, and it's got deep cuts as well. There's an Australian release with a different cover with a black and white guitar neck. It's also, Crabsody in Blue, is a track which is on other editions. This is the 8-track edition. You got Go Down, Dog Eat Dog. So to start off, it opens with 2 deep cuts. These aren't tracks that played live. They're not as well known, but they're great tracks. Let There Be Rock, classic. Bad Boy Boogie, classic live track. Problem Child, so that's appeared again, classic. Overdose, another deep cut, but really good. Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be, probably the best track on the album. But this is one of the problems with the album. The tuning on this track, the guitars are so out of tune. That's something on the early albums where they're not as attentive to things like that. One of the problems with Gibson guitars is, those who play guitar, and for people who are not familiar, Gibsons have what's called a funny scale length. This means the mathematical equation of each fret distance isn't like other guitars, and the tuning between your D and G string can be funny, and then that can send the B string out of whack. Now that's a problem when you're playing the type of chords that AC/DC do, because they involve those three strings. Malcolm plays a Gretsch guitar, that'll have a different scale length. That means its fret calculations mathematically won't talk to Angus's, and that means the tuning can sometimes flam a bit. Now this is something that gets sorted out later on with by someone more, and we'll come to that. So that's something, when you listen to the opening of that track, listen to it, the tuning's way off. It's still a classic though. They got A Whole Lot of Rosie, live favourite, studio version, really good. This album's 9 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10. It's really great. At this time, the band in '76, so they built up a big popularity in Australia. They appear on a show called Countdown about 20 times, which is Australia's version of Top of the Pops, I suppose. Then they make the move to the UK. There's an amazing story about this. So I'm assuming at this time they've recorded High Voltage TNT. The international release of High Voltage has come out, probably Dirty Deeds. This isn't until '77. But what happens is they land in the middle of this hot summer of '76, in the middle of punk, or punk about to explode. And what happens is they're supposed to do a tour with Backstreet Crawler, Paul Kossoff's band, but Kossoff dies, or he's taken ill, and they can't do it. So they have to do a smaller tour, but the first gig they do is some pub in London. I think there was one sounds journalist, a Kerrang journalist, maybe it was Malcolm Dome, someone like that, was at that gig. But what happens is, this is the rumour, basically DC are playing, pub's not that full, they launch into the set, they're doing a 45-minute set, they're going to do another one after they had a break. Play the first set, everyone fucks off. I'm like, oh. What happens is, they all go and tell their mates, you've got to come down this pub, there's this band on and they're amazing. Do the second set and the pub's full, and so begins their rise to superstardom. Why are they incredible? It's the same thing with Van Halen. By the time DC drop in London, calculate they must have done 300 gigs. It could be as many as 400 or 500. It's the same with Van Halen. By the time of Van Halen drop, Van Halen 1 and gone to a Sabbath, they've already done that amount of gigs. I've done, several hundred gigs in my life, but if I could compress those several hundred gigs into a period of 3 or 4 years, your live playing, the well-oiledness of your machine will just go up exponentially. So that's why I think that reason is, Bon Scott, of course, has already got experience of being in London with the band Fraternity. He's older than the other guys. So AC/DC at this point, they're just a well-oiled machine. They're ready to explode. Okay, so this is a weird one. The next album, didn't have it on the cassette when we were kids. This is their lowest selling album of the Bon era in America. And it's also their greatest album. It's also one of the greatest achievements in the genre of hard rock for me, and I'm sure other people agree, and that is Powerage. Weird, pretty cool cover, but they've forsaken the logo. And this is something, after this, they will always feature the classic AC/DC logo. Quick message to any bands getting going. Get a great logo, stick with that logo, don't change that logo. Look at Iron Maiden, look at AC/DC, their branding, Motorhead, great logos, great branding. Judas Priest use it most of the time. Saxon, their logo's on the first album and it's on the most recent album. It works, makes great t-shirts. So what's great about this album, when it's got live favourites, maybe less than Let There Be Rock and DD's, but it's just so consistent. The tuning issues are better on this. The Vander and Young production reaches its zenith. So after this, it's time to move on from Vander and Young. But what they do is capture the hard-hitting sound, and the final piece of the jigsaw comes in with Cliff Williams joining on bass. AC/DC have simple bass parts. So what does Cliff Williams bring to the party? He brings his backing vocals, which I think are better than Mark Evans. His sound's a little rounder. I think Mark Evans has a bit more mid, he's a little more clanky. The roundness and warmness of Cliff Williams' sound will be very influential through the history of hard rock from this point. So many bands are influenced by DC, that direct punch, the directness of the guitars. So by this point, this is a great record. You've got Rock and Roll Damnation, which is possibly the weakest track. This made Top of the Pops, so this was their first exposure in the UK. Then for me, what I think may be one of their all-time greatest tracks, certainly one of Bond's greatest ever lyrics, Down Payment Blues. What a great track. If you've ever been on the dole, if you've ever been skint, it's just like the anthem. Amazing start, Cliff Williams bass just holding it down. We'll come to the groove. You got Gimme a Bullet, great track. Riff Raff, live classic. Sin City, live classic. He used to play that in a covers band I was in called Ministry of Rock, and a band I was in called Vendetta. It was one of the few songs I could sing reasonably well. Bomb's such a high range. Great track. On the side two, they're all deep cuts on side two. None of these they played live much, but there's I probably did at the time. What's Next to the Moon? Brilliant lyrics. Gone Shooting, what a groove on this. I was listening to them doing it with Brian Johnson, a VH1 thing the other day. And, the groove. Up to My Neck in You, great. And then it finishes with like a really gnarly rocker called Kicked in the Teeth, which has got a great intro, great vocal by Bond. So it's just, a lot of people, real DC fans know this is the best album. They don't ignore it. It's a great picture of the band on the back. Again, pushing Angus as the front man. When I was a kid, always thought Angus was the singer. I just digressed there. Just great. Just a great collection of songs. Great sound. What does Cliff Williams? What happens with DC? This is my theory of their groove. What is it that DC do? Is the sound? They've got this pocket. And what they're compared to, which I never thought of at the time, was the Rolling Stones. So in the Rolling Stones, you've got Charlie Watts. But Charlie Watts plays off Keith, and Keith plays off Charlie. And this is how I think AC/DC groove works. Malcolm is the metronome. Phil listens and plays to Malcolm. And basically he sits and finds his space within that. So you've got Malcolm really on it, and then Phil just kind of slots in. Cliff plays off Phil, who's playing off Malcolm. And then he's like, right, I'm getting my space there. Yeah. Angus plays off Malcolm but can listen to the other guys. So he can just slot in his little gap, doing these little kind of lead lines and stuff. And then Bon finds his space in the top. And it's one of the all-time great chemistries in rock. You've got the classic Thin Lizzy lineup. You've got the classic Metallica lineup. The classic Black Sabbath, Zeppelin and so on. AC/DC are like that. It's each individual is great, but when they come together, they're even better. I mean, and Phil Rudd, he's not Neil Peart. He doesn't need to be. He's the best drummer in AC/DC. Cliff Williams is the best bass player in AC/DC. You don't need more. It's all there. So it's getting better. This is kind of celebrated in one of the all-time classic live albums. If You Want Blood, You Got It. Always love that album cover. Weird Bon kind of looks different on the front because he's blurry. Again, we had this on cassette when we were kids, me and my brothers. Riff Raff, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. I mean, these live versions, in an argument, they're better than the studio versions. That's everything about DC. That's what's kept them where they are. They're an incredible live band. They're a better live band than they are in the studio, in a way. Riff Raff, Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. Bad Boy Boogie, brilliant. The Jack, obviously things drop for me there. Problem Child, Whole Lot of Rosie, Rock and Roll Damnation, High Voltage, Let There Be Rock, Rocker. So some of these arrangements are extended, like Let There Be Rock, Whole Lot of Rosie, with the classic Angus chant. I'm not sure where this is recorded, but it's possibly the UK, I would imagine. I'm not looking at the sleeve notes. But it's a classic live album. So what happens next is they come in to basically wanting to break the States. They've been over there. Phil Carson, their head of Atlantic, I think it's in England. You've got to think where the band's at. They're over in the UK, but that's costing a lot of money. DC, it's financially precarious for them. They've got to break, and Powerage hasn't done very well. So there's this guy, and he's been producing a band called City Boy, who have really good harmonies and arrangements, really good guitarist called Mike Slamer in them. He's also produced a band called the Boomtown Rats, and his name is Robert John Mutt Lang, and he will basically, when he connects with DC, alchemy will happen. They will go into the stratosphere, and he will become one of the most important and successful rock producers of all time, but not without controversy for what he does with sounds. But what he does with DC is he his attention to detail is one thing. It gets the tuning and intonation on those guitars sitting. What happens when guitars are slightly out of tune is the sound can flam and it doesn't sit. So what he does, I think they play really careful attention to the guitar tuning, and that basically gives those guitars that extra punch. He pays attention to Bon's diction. Bon can sound a little bunged up sometimes. At the time, the American record label were questioning, is Bon the right guy? On radio's everything in America, so your diction's got to be spot on. And I think, Bon could be, kind of hard to understand sometimes. So he takes care of that. He adds subtle reverbs and delays just to expand the sound a bit. And he dials in, helps dial in really on the spot on arrangements. And the final thing he does is kind of perfect their backing vocals. AC/DC don't do harmonies, but songs will have a subtle harmony occasionally, and Malcolm and Cliff will do good chants. And he just brings all these elements and upscales things for this album. Obviously, Highway to Hell, probably their best album cover. I think that just, again, when you're a kid, you think that's Bon. He's at the front, he must be the singer, but I love that cover. I know it's back front, but it's brilliant. Great picture on the back, capturing the guys. So this is an all-time classic album. I mean, some people maybe prefer this to Powerage, and I wouldn't disagree. I just think just maybe one track lets it down. Highway to Hell, there's no point in talking about that track much, is a classic. Just the riff, quickly, the way it's off the beat, this is the thing. So AC/DC play chords off the beat, they use push chords. So 1, 2, 3, da da da, it's starting before the beat. They'll play they'll put chords before the beat, and that creates anticipation and excitement. And it's there in that track. Girls Got Rhythm, fantastic groove. So that's kind of a new element. I think they hadn't grooved as much as they do on this track up to this point. Again, Mutt Lange's very good at dialing in tempos and getting the tempo right so the groove's right. So brilliant. Walk All Over You, I've played this track live myself. Classic groove, really powerful, brilliant. And then for me, maybe my favourite song by them of all time, or certainly up there, I was talking about Down Payment Blues before, Touch Too Much. This was my first exposure to AC/DC back end of 79. My brother said, there's this music called heavy metal, there's this band AC/DC. I heard that track. I'd actually heard metal before because I'd heard Judas Priest, but on Top of the Pops, but this was the beginning of my access, and it's changed my life. The other thing on this is so Angus's solos start to get more crafted. They're less improvised. Again, that's Mutt Lange coming in. Look, you need to structure more. Great little structured lead break on this. The first one is just so simple. And then the second one, he does a great solo. Angus, you can hear Paul Kossoff. He's got this kind of narrow but fast vibrato. Uses the natural minor scale on the end solo, which is unusual for Angus. Just brilliant backing vocals. Fantastic vocal by Bon. One of the all-time great rock tracks. But not a typical DC track to me. I was watching Sea of Tranquility the other day, and they picked it as a deep cut. It wasn't a single. But in the UK, it's not a deep cut. But they didn't seem to play it live much after that. I suspect because the vocals rock hard. Sorry, I'm just messing around with the packaging here. Beating Around the Bush, the last track, really groovy. This is side 1, great. Side 2, Shot Down in Flames, what a classic. Classic Bon Scott lyric. So many rock lyrics sing about like two things: the male singer's prowess with women, or how he has been wronged by a woman. I have this thing in heavy metal and rock, how the lyrics always blame women. There's never kind of the male sort of going, maybe I got that wrong. But what's great about Shot Down in Flames is, we've all been there, we go out to the pub and we're looking to hit on a girl and get some female interest and fail miserably, and that's what it's about. Then you got Get It Hot, which has got a nice Rolling Stones groove, really like that. If You Want Blood, you got it, all time classic deep cut. Love Hungry Man, this is probably the weak track for me, but it's pretty good. It's funky again. It's like Get It Hot, Beating Around the Bush, Girls Got Rhythm. It's got a funkiness. Then it finishes with Night Prowler. Controversial track at the time because of the Night Stalker murders. Richard Ramirez, is it? around LA, so I think they didn't play that on radio, or there was controversy about that. Not that they've written about that, I don't think. So everything's set. This album makes number 17 in the US charts. It goes platinum, and then the first devastation of a young rock fan's life happens. Bon Scott dies in February. If you're reading the history of AC/DC, the guy wasn't happy. I think a lot of people don't realise, he's 33, he's older than the guys there, doing a punishing schedule. He's not dealing with his issues, he's been on the road a long time, and he's drinking more and more. This is in the era before people go to rehab. It's in the era before bands step in to help. How aware the band were, what the record company thought, I don't know. But Bon Scott basically dies in the passenger seat of a car. He's left out at night by someone who he knew he was friendly with, if you read into it. But it's that classic thing. I think it was always going to happen. If he was to survive, he would have had to have stopped drinking. And that would be very difficult to do if he was in a rock band that is going full pelt towards superstardom.